Hey everybody, welcome to Music City Live. This is Ryan. Welcome to the show. I'm here with Brian Smith, former agent, bass player, and father of two. Brian Smith, thank you so much
How
for
you
coming
doing?
on, man.
You're welcome. I'm loving this.
Yeah, man, it's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too. And yeah, thanks for coming on, man. I was saying to you earlier, the last time I saw you was in the middle of the pandemic. I think I delivered some speakers to your house, and and then all you were telling me earlier, all chaos broke loose in your world. But you're here now.
I'm here now. I'm above ground. That's a good thing.
That's a good thing. Yeah, absolutely. And we met originally, I think, and I don't think it was at Balloon Fest, but it was around that sort of mid 90s time
Right.
through my dad. And you and my dad would talk all the time.
Yeah.
I remember this because I would hang out, because I was a kid, and I really, if there wasn't any cables to wrap or cases to load, I would usually hang out near my dad's office.
Right.
And you and my dad would be on the phone together.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when I think I called you on the phone or something when I was delivering those speakers to your house, and you had a hard time not saying Brian from Active.
Yeah.
And it was funny to me because when I would sit in my dad's office
Yeah.
all those years ago, that was what it was.
Yeah.
Active Talent,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I remembered. And so that was funny to me at the time when I was delivering those speakers. But it was around that time. And I had some pretty fond memories of that sort of period of time. Like that whole Labatt versus Molson Blues Fest time was interesting for me because I was super young, and I was at this festival at night and doing lights and helping set up, and it was cool. Like it was a
Yeah.
cool thing to be involved in.
Yeah.
And one of the first bands, I would say, I don't remember which particular day it was, but one of the first bands that I did lights for was for you guys.
Oh,
It was for
really?
Voodoo Lounge, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because I started doing lights back then, but I didn't really because my dad opened up his bar. It was the Baja Club.
I remember those
But the
days.
Baja Club
Yes.
wasn't open yet. It only opened later. It was like a couple of years later.
Yes.
So one of the first sort of things that I was doing there was I was doing lights for the Balloon Fest, and some Par 64 cans, and it wasn't like the most extravagant light show like what we do now, but
Right.
it didn't matter because it was it was all about the music and all about people coming out and having a good time, and we did. So
Yeah, Ron had a really nice club there. We just couldn't put people in the club. That was the only drag about that club. Like I tried everything. I even booked Saga in that room.
I remember that.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And they couldn't draw flies. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, it was weird, and I don't know even if he really knows now, like what it was, if he could really put his finger on it either, because he had a lot of really great people like yourself involved in helping him get it up off the ground and stuff. I don't know if it was just timing, because I remember when I was a kid around that time, and I was in high school, and I remember him saying a lot that he used to feel like he had to compete with Rich Monroe. And
Right.
and I think that was part of it, right? Like I think he kept trying to kind of go after students, but
Right.
then he'd go after the sort of the classic rock crowd,
Right.
right? He was
And
trying
you
to do
can't
both.
really do both.
Yeah, and he was trying to do both because I think
Yeah.
he was just trying to figure out what the fit was,
Yeah.
At the time,
Yeah.
looking back.
But it was
right?
a nice club.
It was a nice club, and ironically drove past there yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
And I was tempted to walk up to the door and go inside and see. The last time I did, I think it was a Jazzercise, and I walked down the hallway, and nothing had changed. They didn't change anything in the bars were still there, the dance floor was still there.
Wow.
But I mean that was like maybe 10 or 15 years ago now.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. But the club has been gone for, I think he had it from basically 96 to 98 or 99, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
In that area, and so I mean it's been gone for 25 years.
Yeah, and I remember because I was booking Norma Jeans at the time, right? And Jonathan used to get really pissed off at me because I'd be going down and checking out Ron's club and doing some work with him, and he'd start raving about, this is a conflict of interest and all. No, it's not a conflict of interest. No, not at all. So it was a weird time.
Yeah, it was a weird time for us as a family too, and it would have, I guess it would have been a weird time for you with all
Yeah,
the stuff that was going on and all the politics of it all, right?
yeah.
That's the part that people don't see, right?
No, no, they don't. Yeah, bands, they want to play as much as they can, and if they play in another club in town, the other club owner would get pissed off because he wants them to stay loyal to him. Well, you can't stay loyal. I mean, you want to play. When you're a musician, you want to play. So if you get a chance to play a club up the street, you're going to do it. As long as you don't do it the next night.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the
yeah.
only problem I have with that.
Yeah,
Is
right.
if you play it like 3 weeks later, it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Just make sure you can compete with them when they're playing up the street with the band that you put in.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into that later on. I want to ask you about things that relate to that, like radius clauses and that. But
Yeah.
let's talk about some things that people probably don't know a lot about. Because as I mentioned earlier to you, there's people that watch this that probably know you really well, or at least they think they do. And there's people that probably don't know you at all. So let's go back. So you're born where?
London, England.
Which I didn't know
Oh, okay.
before today.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
I came to Canada in '64, the
Okay.
year of the Beatles, when they hit North America. So I was 14 at the time. So I was 14 years old, and we moved to Mimico, Toronto, Mimico, on the lake shore.
Yeah.
And
What was the reason you came to Canada?
we emigrated to Canada because we thought it was a land of opportunity. And the weird thing is when my family wanted to, we were either going to move to the country or move to Canada. And we had a family meeting and we said, let's go to Canada. And we were all in agreement of that. So we did. And I had expectations of, I get to Canada, I get to ride a horse to school and stuff like that. And
That's awesome.
I really thought that, it was really strange. I thought, the land of cowboys or whatever. And it wasn't anything like that
Where
at
did
all.
where did that perspective come from, do you think, at the time?
Probably just from TV.
TV. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But so we moved to Toronto there. We only stayed there in Mimico for about a year. And then we moved to Malton,
Okay. Yeah.
where the airport. It used to be Malton Airport,
Mhm.
there. And I used to get a job as a kid at the airport, part-time job and stuff. And I started playing guitar and learning how to play guitar. One of my friends' brother had a band, and we go in and see what they were all about and teach us a few things, stuff like that. And so I started playing guitar, bass first, then guitar, and then started a little bit. All of a sudden, started a band called the Barons, and
Okay.
then after the Barons, we got the System together, which was a very good band. We became a very good band. We were together probably about 2 years, I would say, and we got to the point where we were actually writing songs together.
Mhm.
We did 3 songs on a TV show,
Oh, really?
on a CBC show. And, my parents were around watching the TV and stuff.
That's
"Oh,
awesome.
my son's, he's going to make it. He's going to make it. Well, it was
The
just
dream
a
was
tease.
the dream was
Yeah.
alive.
Yeah, the dream was alive, but wasn't to be. It wasn't to be. But we did make it to a certain extent. I mean, we got to a point where we did have somewhat of success with an album and stuff like that. But that was a little later on.
Right.
Yeah. So
And who was in that band? The System.
the system actually. There was a band after the System I'll tell you about. But the system was one guy was Burt Mellon, who died at a very early age in a car crash,
Oh, wow.
which was a drag.
Yeah,
and,
no
and
doubt.
then we went on after that and formed a band called Rocket 88. And Rocket 88, we started playing like gigs downtown, all over the Queen Street and all the sleazy East End bars in Toronto. And Rocket 88, that band was Paul Nixon on drums, who was he was the original drummer in he became the drummer in Downchild Blues Band, played
wow.
on Flip Flop Fly, all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Killer drummer.
Awesome.
Good shuffle player, really good shuffle player. And then George Bland was on the keyboards, and James Tovey, he was on vocals, and myself and Dave Cooper, who later joined Ian Thomas Band.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh, yeah, Ian
James
Thomas
Tovey became a councilman later on, and
Wow.
and he's got a park named after him
Oh my
in
goodness.
Toronto. Yeah.
Wow.
So things, your career changes sometimes.
Yeah, the directions that things can
Yeah.
go, man. The journey is can be crazy.
Yeah, but still stay in touch with some of them. Dave Cooper passed away. James Tovey passed away, not so long ago. And, it is what it is. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people, that you want to see that you can't see anymore,
Yeah, amen.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot of reasons why I do this show is, to try to get people on here to get all this type of stuff down.
Yeah.
To try to get the journey out, the story, down and inspire the next generation coming up.
Yeah.
It's like what I told you, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And because a lot of these stories and these names and these bands and all this stuff, it's not out there. So we need to get it out there, and we need to get these people the accolades they deserve and inspire the next generation.
Yeah.
So after the System, after that band, then where did things go from there?
Well, after Rocket 88, I just sleazed for about 2 years playing in different bands, trio. We had a trio that we just threw together, and it's called Bumwad. And we and we play
Original name.
Yeah, and we play all over the place, for peanuts. But then looking at nowadays, it wasn't peanuts. We'd make $100 a night.
Oh, at that point, that was good.
And years ago, that was pretty good.
That was pretty good.
You make $250, $300 a gig, that kind of thing, and that went on for a while. But got a little boring. And after that, I met Barry Kobus, who owned the Canadian Musicians magazine. I think he went on to do that, if I'm not mistaken. But he put me with a bunch of guys, Daniel Lanois, Mike McCurley, and a drummer. I can't remember his name, but anyway, he was only in the band for about a month, and then we got a guy named Ed Mitchell, and that band was called Elvin.
Elvin.
And
Well,
Elvin,
we got a picture of that.
Yeah.
In the band pics.
yeah, you might have.
Yeah. Elvin at the very end there, Jer. See, and what's funny is when I yeah, there it is.
Yeah,
So where's Daniel? On the right?
on the right. That's Dan.
Wow.
That's Dan right there.
That's crazy.
And Ed Mitchell, he used to be in a band called Whiskey Hell for a while. And this band stayed together for about 2 years. And did quite well, actually. I mean, we've been playing some pretty cool gigs as per the suits. You had to the Park Plaza.
Those are
play,
awesome, man. And the ties too. Those
Yeah.
are legendary. And the hair, man. The whole look. I love it. Whose idea was the plaid shirts? That's what I want to know.
Well, we didn't. They wanted us to have the fluffy white shirts,
Yeah.
and we said, no, we can't wear those things. We just can't do it. So we said, let's at least go, a little the other way, So we figured, the Western way, we'll get plaid shirts, and
That's
everybody can
awesome.
have a different plaid, and away we go.
So when you went, because I asked you to send me a couple photos, and I saw this photo when I was labeling it, I had no idea that was Daniel Lanois.
No?
No idea. No. That's crazy.
Well,
Because I worked with him.
He hasn't changed that much, really. His face. I mean, he's bald, as we all go bald now. He's no hair, but he wears the hat.
No, now that you mention it, I can see it 100%.
Yeah, he wear the hat. Now
Yeah.
he wears a hat all the time, or a bandana or whatever.
Yeah.
And but yeah, he looks the same, and he sounds the same. And he's still got his pedal steel guitar that he bought when we started Elvin. He learned to play pedal steel
Really?
in that guitar in that band.
Wow.
He started playing pedal steel, and he had a show bud. And when I went and saw him this past summer in the park, he still had that pedal steel guitar.
Really?
Yeah, and he played it.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's legendary, man.
Plus, he had a nice Les Paul that was worth probably $100,000.
There's well, and there's some Jerry in that folder. We might as well go through some of these picks because I know we I didn't know which band this was, but this was one of the other picks you sent.
That's the system right there.
Okay.
It's a radio interview that we did.
Look at that mic,
Yeah,
old school, man. Look at
Yeah.
it's so heavy. The stand is bending.
yeah,
The boom is bending.
and yeah.
That's crazy.
And Mike,
Great look,
Mike
though.
Whittam, that's the keyboard player. You can't really see his face there, and the guy's hands
Yeah,
in front
yeah,
of his face, but he was the keyboard in the band. Al Cairns, Burt Mellon, James Tovey, Mike Whittam, and myself on the end.
Wow. And when would this have been?
This was Rocket 88 with Paul Nixon, the guy that played with Downchild. Dave Cooper played with Ian Thomas later on, and Shady George Bland. He was the keyboard player, killer keyboard player. And then Jimmy again, right there, Jim Tovey,
Yeah.
and myself on the top.
Looks like Jack Black in the hat.
Yeah.
So some of these things, like I was saying earlier, right? How these things go in waves.
Yeah.
Like you, even just the attire that you're wearing in some of these acts, like some of this stuff has come back around again.
Oh, yeah.
You know
Oh,
what
yeah.
I mean? It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we bought those outfits. The manager took us down to somewhere around Yorkville, downtown, and we picked out those outfits. But and then Danny LaRue, he's from Montreal, the second on the right.
Yep.
He came up with the idea to wear the tux. So we all had our thing, you know.
Yeah.
And then Owen Tennyson was the drummer. But the band, Paul and I were the leaders in that band, and we went through a lot of different players before we got this band.
Is that right?
I mean, we auditioned before we got that our drummer. I remember auditioning at a studio in Toronto. Oh, it must have been like 70 drummers. It was
Wow.
ridiculous. It was crazy. And we ended up picking Steve Nagus
Oh wow.
from Saga.
Yeah.
And that's how I knew Steve when we were at the Baja Club. But anyway, we ended up getting him, and then he ended up going with a band called Pockets, which became Saga.
Wow. It's like the 2 degrees of separation has always been, eh? It's
Yeah.
crazy.
I know.
And to get 70 drummers to audition?
Yeah.
Like that, I don't think
Well,
that'll happen
I put
anymore.
an ad in the Toronto Star, right? I put an ad in the Toronto Star, and everybody. And so we had to weed out the ones on the phone for first off,
Yeah.
and then try and get the ones that sounded like they knew. But a lot of the time, when they sound like they're the guy for the gig, quite often they're not.
They're
nowhere
not,
near.
Yeah, they tell you what you want to hear.
So,
I
but a
know all
lot of
about
that would
this.
be one song. You say, no, that's it. That, and out he'd go, right?
Yeah.
But
Wow. So, I noticed. So when was that band was called Bully? When was that?
that would have been probably mid 70s, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I saw there was London Records. There's like you guys had there was a record deal that you guys had.
Yeah, we had a record deal with House of Lords Records.
House of Lords,
They
okay.
were from Calgary, and then we got a distribution deal with RCA.
Right. Yeah.
So we did quite well out west, actually. We got airplay out there and everything. But just like Toronto bands, you can't do anything in Toronto. They won't do anything for you. It's
Really?
crazy. Yeah, like the Chum FM guys and everything, they wouldn't play the single at all,
Why do you think that is?
Well, because you have to pay. People, that's the way it was.
It was pay to play even in the
Yeah, that's
70s,
right.
eh?
Yes. Yeah, and you'd schmaltz them up. Somebody would come in with money or money behind the band, and they would buy their way into getting a single played. But we didn't even get a single played, like, ever.
Wow.
But
It's
we did out west. Out west, we'd be fine.
It's interesting. Is it because it's just a different culture out there?
Yeah, I think they're more open-minded, out there. And they're not, I guess in Toronto, they have to do it a certain way, and-
More corporate.
Yeah, more corporate, for sure. But out west, they were more forgiving that way, for sure.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I would have thought that back then, you know, that bands, really good bands, could have gotten their single played without having to pay. But I guess
Well,
not the way, right?
no, yeah. If it was a Toronto record company,
Mm,
maybe.
right.
But when it's from out west, you know, when your
Yeah.
deal's from out west, you know, they were too busy paying, you know, Gatto and stuff like that. You know,
Yeah, right.
You know, they were playing those bands. You know, it's nothing against Gatto. They were a decent band. They got a lot of airplay actually for a while. Yeah, there's some good Toronto bands that we used to compete against. That's for sure. I mean,
So-
it was a competition to a certain extent back then.
So
you know.
when you were competing, like you were competing, obviously you were mentioning like, you know, you didn't get a lot of support from radio, but were you competing for what? For gigs?
Gigs,
Yeah.
absolutely gigs. You know.
And to get
Tours, to get a tour anywhere was hard.
Yeah.
But that's how we met. And my tie, that's where the tie to London came in, because Brian Ferryman became our manager, and Brian Ferryman, he owned or had part ownership in Springfield Studio. Do you remember that?
No.
It was a recording studio in Springfield,
Okay. Yeah.
just outside of London, right?
Yeah.
On the way to Tilsonburg, basically.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was an old schoolhouse.
Oh wow.
And that's where we recorded our record
Interesting.
there. Paul Steenhouse was,
Oh my gosh.
remember him? Paul Steenhouse
Yeah,
was the
absolutely.
producer, one of the producers, and or engineer, I should say. And and the schoolhouse had like beds downstairs, so we'd stay over, and they had a person that fed us and everything in the morning and
Oh,
stuff.
wow.
So it was a cool atmosphere. Of course, I knew we weren't making money at that point. So when we were recording the record, so I had to sell my house, and I moved to Seaforth,
Oh really?
and that's how the tie came with London, because Ken Stewart worked for BBR agency with
remember
Brian
that.
Curtis and John Young,
Oh my gosh, John Young.
right? And they used to book Bully. They'd do all our days.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Wow.
and that's how I got tied in with the London scene.
Crazy. Yeah, I mean, I remember because I was a kid growing up. John Young worked at Fanshawe,
Right.
and that's where I first had met him.
Yeah.
And my dad was doing shows there, but even before that, I DJ'd there.
Right.
I was working for a DJ in town, and I DJ'd there in the Student Union building, and I met John, and John was I mean, even at that point, John was already a legend there.
Yeah.
Everybody knew John Young from
Yeah.
Fanshawe. I mean, it was
Well,
it's
he,
just
yeah,
a known thing.
He was an agent extraordinaire with Brian Curtis and Ken Stewart.
I had no idea.
And from there, Ken Stewart started his own company,
Oh, really?
KS Productions.
Hmm. That sounds familiar too, actually.
Yeah, he did that. And I, at the time when Bully broke up, I was in Seaforth, really doing nothing. And Kenny and I stayed in contact. And he hooked me up with he said, no, you got to get playing again. You got to play. I said, geez, Willie, I was really depressed about the fact the band's gone, you know. That was it. But he saved my life to a certain extent, Kenny, because he hooked me up with a house gig, a place in London called Hoagie's.
Oh, okay.
And Hoagie's, I had that house gig for almost a year. Every weekend, Friday, Saturday, a gig every weekend. You know,
Yeah.
how often does that happen? You
Yeah,
know,
right.
so I had that every weekend, and he hooked me up with Terry Lee. So I played with Terry Lee down there, and George Edmonds, who's passed now, rest his soul, and Mike McKenna, keyboard player, not the
Oh,
guitar
yeah.
player, Mike McKenna. So we had that gig for like almost a year. And then after that, I started playing with Ken Stewart, Peter Brennan, and Don DiCarlo. And we were
Oh,
playing
wow.
all over the place, right, in town, because Kenny knew all the clubs.
Sure.
And KS Productions, eventually, him and my wife talked me into being an agent. I didn't want anything to do with that. I didn't want anything to do with that. But they got together and behind my back said, you know, and Kenny, you know, Brian, he'd be a really good agent. You know, he's got the gab. You know, and like he'd be good. You know, and eventually they did talk me into.
I was
doing
going to
that.
ask you how it all came to be, but that's interesting.
Yeah, so that's how Active Talent started. So Kenny and I, Kenny at the time had a relationship with the agency, which was the biggest agency in Canada. It was the agency in S.L. Feldman. That was the only game, really.
Yeah.
Those two. And Kenny would go down there and buy bands from them and sell them, you know, all around the area, because Kenny was the guy who had all the Eddie's rooms, the front end rooms.
Mm.
And so he could keep the bands going for front ends, and they were hard to find,
Right.
front ends. So we had 4 Eddie's rooms that Kenny took care of. So that's how that started.
Wow. Where did the name come from?
I think Kenny thought of the name, to be honest with you. I can't remember thinking Active. Yeah, it would have been Kenny. I wouldn't have thought of that. Yeah, Active Talent. So we started Active Talent, and that's how the whole booking thing started. So we started doing that, and it was pretty good for it. And Kenny did it for, I think, about 2 months. And then he looked at me and said, I can't do this. And I said, what's going on? What do you mean you can't do it? It's going really good. He says, I know, it is going good. But I got an audition for Cats and in Germany, and he got the gig.
Oh, wow.
Hence the move to Germany.
Right.
And I said, oh, fuck, you know, I guess I don't want to do this by myself. And he said, no, you can do it. Just keep it going. Keep it going. We won't tell anybody. So we didn't tell anybody that he was gone. And I kept it going for about a month until, you know, I said, well, Kenny's not coming back, blah, blah, blah. And then I hired James McLean, Colin Stewart, and Colin, who else was it? Oh, Jerry Blay from the agency.
Oh, really?
So
Wow.
he was from the agency. So he moved to London, met a girl here, and he started working for Active Talent.
Wow. I didn't know Colin worked for Active Talent.
Yeah, he did for not for long.
Yeah, okay.
But he did.
All right.
And then he started his own company, did the theater thing, you know.
Yeah, well, because
Happening Entertainment.
Happening. That's right. Because
Yeah,
he used to have I was just talking about him the other day, because he used to have an office in this building.
Yes.
Happening Entertainment
Yes.
was in this building, not far from where we're sitting.
Yeah.
And I told somebody that the other day, and they're like, really? And I was like, it was almost a closet of an office, too, because it was kind of like this weird L-shaped thing on the end there. And if people come here now, we built, basically, it's bigger now because we changed the layout and changed the walls. But
Right.
the artist suite, we call it, which is where we do have all the big amps and we can crank up in there. That's where it was. And so I remember him as a kid. He's passed now, but he was really close with my grandparents, because my grandparents were the landlord here at the time. Him and my grandparents would chat all the time, but I had no idea that was. I always just knew it as you. I didn't know that there was more than you at Active Talent.
Yeah, at one time, and then there was Cameron Grant, who was in and out, but most of the stuff he did there was, you know, funny posters. He'd make up all these funny posters and stuff. It was hilarious.
That's hilarious.
But
yeah.
and
absolutely.
then so Cameron was working for us for a while, but he never really did any business. He was just more promotion for In the Flesh, basically. That's what he did when we got In the Flesh going, right?
Yeah, and that was I remember In the Flesh from that same period, that sort of '90s period, because he played too. He played.
That was a killer little band, you know. I mean,
it
wasn't a tribute band as such, because they didn't have the lookalikes and stuff like that, but they did a good job. Really good job of putting that music across. There's no doubt about that.
It was good, and I remember we had them as a headliner on the Saturday night one year at the Bloomfest.
Right.
And you know, there was the lights and the smoke and the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
They did a good job. It was because I mean at that time I had no frame of reference. I hadn't gone to see The Wall or any of that stuff, right?
Right.
I hadn't been to a Pink Floyd show or anything. So to me, like, that was, wow, this was really cool. And it was real moody music, and, you know.
Yeah. And Cameron, he was the mother hen in that band, because he had to keep those guys in line, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I could tell you stories. I won't do that. But anyway, yeah. But Cameron definitely kept those guys in line and kept it going, and they were working all the time. I mean, they got a lot of gigs, that band.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you this later, but you bring this up now, so I'll bring it up now. Keeping a band together. What's your perspective on that?
Oh man, it's a marriage. It's a
Because
marriage.
you've obviously booked over the years a
Yeah.
gazillion bands, and they've come and they've gone, and
They've changed members. Whatever. You need at least two foundation members in a band. I really believe that to keep it going.
yeah,
You know, because it is a revolving door to a certain extent. A lot of the people that come and go and come and go, but you got to keep the band together. You got to keep it going.
yeah.
You know, so
Even the Beach Boys have, I think, only 2 members left.
yeah, yeah. Well, a lot of that, especially playing clubs, keeping the band name going. A lot of the bands, like you'd have one guy, like Doctor Hook. There was one guy, you know, playing Norma Jeans. Like we used to book all those bands in that club.
That's right.
A lot of good bands played Norma Jeans.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, David Wilcox, April Wine, yeah, geez, Pat Travers, a lot of the Trues. The Trues were the first band to ever play Norma Jeans for 2 nights
I
in a
didn't know
row.
that.
Yeah, they sold out 2 nights in a row.
Really?
Yeah, that was the only band that ever played 2 nights in that room.
Wow, I didn't know that. Yeah, and it's gone now. I drove past there the other day. Obviously, it's gone, but I mean, I drove past there the other day, and I think they've got where the stage used to be. They've put a wall up, and they've got like a little cafe
All right.
on that side, and then the other side's like a store
Oh, okay.
selling.
Oh, okay. So they split it up.
They split it up,
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, but you know what? That the same can be said about all kinds of the old venues, right?
Yeah.
Years gone by. But we'll get to that. The you mentioned we talked about Daniel. You said that sort of meeting Daniel changed everything for you.
Yeah.
Let's get back to that for a sec. What happened there?
Well, I was never a singer, but I'd sing the odd harmony and stuff. And Dan was always on me. He said, "No, you've got a natural voice. You can sing." So he'd push me all the time to sing. And it got to the point where I was singing like a third of the night.
Mm.
And I would never have done that without him, because he used to teach us harmonies and stuff like that. That's where I learned how to sing harmonies, pick harmonies, for certain people, know their range. And so that was a big thing for me.
Interesting.
And he always made me play scales and stuff like that, well, not make me, but,
Encourage you to.
Yeah, because Dan was the kind of guy, he when you finished the set and you went up to your room, he would practice between sets every time.
Really?
Every time.
Wow.
He was, oh yeah, that's the kind of guy he was. He just practiced all the time.
That's wild. I
Yeah.
wonder where that came from.
I don't.
That's
I
dedication.
guess he
man.
just had the drive. I mean, he did take lessons as a kid, to play guitar and stuff. So it was drummed into him that you gotta play. And I know now that my son teaches, I've seen what he's done with his students, and he does the same thing. He forces them to, you got to do this, you got to do that, and he gets them to a point where, holy shit, they can play.
Wow.
And a lot of people can't do that as teachers, because it takes a special person, I think, to be a teacher. It takes a lot of patience,
Yeah.
So that's a good thing, because it's good to see some of the students that he's teaching. He's got these he's got these 4 girls that he's been teaching for about a couple of years now, and they can actually play like a full set.
Really?
Yeah, and he's got videos of them and stuff, and they all play, and they're only like 14, 15 years old,
Wow.
something like that.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's amazing. Yeah, that's at that, like, even at that age, it would take patience for sure.
oh yeah, Oh,
especially when they get frustrated, because a lot of kids nowadays at that age,
yeah.
they
But
want
he put these are students that he put together
Interesting.
and got them all together and said, "You guys, I'm going to start a band." So he's into that now, like putting bands together for these students, and he gets extra money out of the people that he teaches, because he once a month he'll get those students together, aside from making money teaching them as individuals.
Sure.
So it's a good idea, that's for sure. But
Well, yeah, absolutely, and that it supports my point of like, how do you keep the band together? It's like,
yeah,
well, first you got to put one together.
yeah.
And I was, that's another thing is I have to imagine it's more difficult to put a band together today than it used to be, for sure, because there's a lot of distractions now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the difference between the one big difference I think in bands, like when we booked a band like, say, Raucous or Sire, or all those bands that we used to book, those they worked hard, and they went on the road, and they were a family, and those bands never went through members. They kept the bands going. It's the same. It's pretty well. Aquas, there's another band.
Yeah.
They kept the same guys, but they worked hard as a band, and they got to go on the road and work together, learn songs, write songs. They learned how to write songs, and the most important thing to the bands back then was, we got to have an album. They wanted an album. Everybody wanted an album. And once they got to that point, everything would settle down, and they felt that it was worth it, to do this once you've got something to show for it,
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
Touring back then versus now, I have to imagine there's parts of it that are different, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, certain things that haven't changed, like, a bunch of guys having to start off getting in a van and going, driving around.
Yeah.
That part hasn't changed. But like, one of the things I was going to bring up was, the sort of the monetization of it all, right? Like, how do you make money? And
Yes.
like you were saying back then, you were making $100 plus a gig, which at that time was great. I don't know what it is now. I have no idea.
Well, I think that those bands were probably, Aces Wild and all those bands that we used to book at Active Talent and send them on the road. I mean, they had to go to the PA shop and get a PA, and have a sound man to go with them and all that stuff. That's a big change, because now, you go to a club and it's production supplied. So that part of it's changed. But the money that you make changed too, because they had to pay for the production at the club, right?
Yeah.
So they have a sound man and pay him. So that changed.
Yeah. So
For sure.
Do you think that? So you think it's come down a little bit in terms of like economies of scale, of course, but do you think the amount that bands on average are charging now is less than it was back then?
Yes.
Yeah.
In terms of, in retrospect, yeah. Like, thinking of the, how much a dollar was worth back then.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, now, and that's another thing that I always hated about the business, is that, the good bands weren't necessarily the ones that got the gigs.
Mm.
It's the ones that were the cheapest got the gigs a lot of the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I would think it would be the ones that would put butts in seats that would get the gigs.
No.
Really?
Yeah, because like, a club owner, he thinks of it in terms of money. But I always used to say, the band, if it's good enough, you got to put them in a few times, and then they'll draw. But most club owners, they give them one shot and that's it, they're gone. So that's why, they'd rather take a band for $200 than pay $600 for a band,
Yeah, I mean, if that's the, I can see why they would do that if that's the idea, is you give them one shot, but because then you're just constantly giving everybody one. Like, it's just you're not building any rapport, you're not building any following for them to come back.
No, exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that's interesting. So Active Talent, after your partner went to Germany, you kept it going. And at what point, a bunch of guys kind of came and went. And then at what point was it just you?
Oh, it was me probably the last, so it would have been the last 10 years of the company, I'd say. Maybe 8 years was probably just me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when was that?
And that would have been, oh, geez. That would have been.
Approximately.
Oh, I'm trying to think now. Late 90s, I would think. No, after that. 85 maybe. 85 maybe. I started taking, but I started taking it on myself when we moved out of the business center, when I had 3 offices there, right?
Okay.
And I was paying so much money for rental there. I figured, geez, I can buy a house and we can put the company there. So when I did that, I only had myself at that point.
Okay.
And so I had the front room of the house, and my 2 sons were in a band, so they had the basement, so they could, jam down in the basement. And that's how it started. Now I'm still in that house, but the kids are gone. They got their own houses and everything.
Yeah.
And I sold my house at Seaforth because I was renting that out, and that was a nightmare. But anyway, and I just kept it going by myself,
Wow. That's cool.
And like all the Norma Jean stuff, basically, I was by myself doing all that stuff. It was pretty good. Jerry Blay, when he was with me, he had a band called 1964 as the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
Killer band from the States. And he had the rights to that. And I guess he had that from the agency days. And he would book them in Europe, like Germany, Austria, places like that. And this band was getting like 10,000 a night U.S. And that was back then. That was huge money for a tribute band.
Absolutely.
And occasionally he'd put on a couple of extra tickets, and we get our flights paid for, and we go with the band to Austria and Germany.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and and have a great time. They play casinos and stuff like that over there. But they were so good, that band.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Jared, can you scroll up for me? The other way. Sorry. I meant down. That's what I meant. Keep going. So one of the things I'm curious about, and there's lots of people who are going to watch this that are going to be like, can't believe you asked that question. But it's a valid question. Cover bands versus original acts. When you were booking, was there, would the people who were booking gravitate towards one or the other? Like was cover bands?
Well, cover bands were always the bread and butter of the company.
Yeah.
But I would always encourage them to do the odd original tune in their sets, but don't announce it. I hate it when a band used to say, "This is an original," and don't do that. Get it, just play it as it's part of the set, and I think you'll get a lot more longevity out of that, doing it that way for sure.
Yeah.
So that was a big thing. But the one band that I did start out booking was Harum Scarum. And I took them under the active wing because every song that band did, it sounded to me like it should be on the radio. Every song, like it was like, so I would just book them, and I wouldn't say anything to the owners about there's an original band or anything, and I'd keep them going for a while, and they knew it was a good band. So they would get returns, but they were listening to a lot of original material. They might have done a couple of Cop songs, but not many. But I had that band for I think I booked them for about 4 months, something like that, until the agency scooped her. One of the the bigger agencies scooped them, But I never ever had a band contracted, as an exclusive band of the company. I never ever did that because I never believed in that.
Interesting.
If you're doing the job for the band, you stay and you do it. If you get to the point where you deserve more and you're working harder, by all means.
Yeah, right.
Go on your way.
Interesting. Yeah, that's well, and that's pretty awesome because I mean, there's a lot of people that obviously don't know behind the scenes that would think that that would be a thing, right? That you
Yeah.
would sign to an agency, and
Yes.
that would be a
A lot
normal
of bands
thing.
did. Well, the agency, all the bigger agents, they did that. You know.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, there wasn't really that many agents really in London at the time. I think Active Talent was probably the only one by the time, in the last years. For sure, the last 8 years or so, we were the only agent left
Yeah.
in this town.
Yeah, it's true because even early days for me, people would ask me, "Oh, how do I book bands?" And
Yeah.
and you were the only guy I could think of in town at the
Yeah.
time. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What 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 would and I mean we've already talked a little bit about this, but like what would people look for? And you said obviously the cheapest price, but is there anything that certain bands would get booked more than others because of a certain thing?
Yeah, bands that could keep people on the dance floor. I mean, that was a big thing.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, if you can play material that people can have a good time to and dance, that was, I mean, art rock bands were hard to book. Like
Mm.
Equus was a hard band to book because they would do Rush and stuff like that, and that was a hard band to get booked. But then you get a band like Vigilance or Sire or those bands, they kept people rocking,
Sure.
They had the dance floor going, and White Frost was another one.
Mm.
White Frost, I think they were from Toronto, Hamilton area, and the Live Sex Show with Darren
Oh,
Smith,
I remember that band.
right? And then he went with Jakey Lee. He ended up playing with Jakey Lee,
Oh, I
from
didn't
Ozzy's
I
band.
didn't even realize that.
Yeah, he's the lead front singer in that band,
Oh wow.
Jakey Lee band. Yeah.
Wow. Crazy.
Yeah, but
smart.
but
2 degrees of separation
He was
again.
in Harem Scarum, and he was in Live Sex Show. Was the top 40 band that he was in, and it was a killer band. But it kept people on the dance floor, man. They loved that band.
Yeah, that's the magic, man.
Yeah.
The dance floor, keeping the dance floor packed is
Yeah.
definitely the magic.
And
that's
one
for
of
sure.
the big successful bands back then for that was in the past 20 years or so was Orange Man.
Orange Band. Okay, I didn't even. When was that? Because I didn't even hear them.
Orange Man, they had an original band on the side, so they were smart. They did C Spot Run.
Oh, C Spot Run. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Okay.
So they were Orange Man.
Oh, I didn't-
And
I
they
didn't
were a
realize.
top 40 band, and they were making really good money. That band.
oh, really?
Yeah, everybody wanted that band. They still play at the East Sides, I believe.
Really?
Yeah,
That's crazy.
yeah,
Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, I did a lot of shows, obviously, for my dad at the Baja, and then all the concerts that I did over the years. And man, you're right. If I had to count the amount of bands that were at that level that could not only just keep a dance floor packed, but just keep the crowd moving, keep
Yes.
everybody engaged. It
Yeah.
wasn't a ton, man. It wasn't
No,
a ton
well,
of bands.
a perfect example of that with a show and entertaining is Bob Noxious. When I met
Yeah.
that band, when I met Bob Reed, I mean, I thought, man, I got to book these guys.
Yeah.
So I just did what I could with them, and I got them on shows, outdoor shows, opening shows for bigger acts and stuff like that. They're killer to this day. That band.
They got a following, man.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild. I took a screenshot of Bob will think this is funny, but they do the Santa Claus parade every year, and I donated the sound system to him this year for the parade, and
Right.
he did a nice thing. They set up the float in the car star over here, and because it's warmer, and they did a nice thank you video, and they had my banner in it, and I appreciate that, and it was funny. I was watching this sort of wrap up. He calls his fans rockaholics, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
And thanks rockaholics for coming out to the Santa Claus parade. This is a wrap. It was like a wrap up video. And I think I watched it. I don't know, maybe had 2 days or 3 days after he put it up. It had 7,700 views on this little London Santa Claus parade wrap up video.
Yeah.
And it was just shot on somebody's cell phone, and 7,700 views on this little Facebook video.
Yeah.
Not even YouTube, Facebook. So it's his followers, you know?
Yeah.
And he's got a
weird-
following, man. It's
the
crazy.
Weird thing about Bob is that you see that guy up on stage and the show and the whole thing, and and Bob, when you're one on one with him, he is the gentlest guy. He's a gentleman.
100%.
Like, and he gives back to the community. He does a lot of good things for London.
I had him on episode 2, I believe. So many, getting to a point where I'm trying to remember them all. But prepping for that episode and even doing that episode, it's funny you talk about the giving back. I had no, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I've worked with Bob now for like a couple of decades. I had no idea how passionate he was about that.
Oh yeah,
It's like it's a foundational pillar of why he does what he does.
yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, he used to do the barbecue at Norma Jean's every year. The barbecue, like Christmas, and have kids in there seeing the band and everything, and and they'd all wander around. He's got tables of gifts and stuff that people would bid on and stuff like that. And he'd give back all the time to the food bank, whatever.
I had no idea how passionate he was about that until I was, prepping and doing that episode, and then it started to all add up. Like, he does the toy drives and he does all this stuff that he does, and it's 100 for those people that don't realize it's 100% genuine. Like that is all him, man. He really does want to do that stuff. He loves doing that stuff. And I see that very clearly now, and it inspired me actually. I did the Santa Claus Parade in Hyde Park this year for the first time.
There you go.
I did the Santa Claus Parade. So, and and it was phenomenal, and I can understand a little bit now, having just done it literally last weekend. I can understand now a little bit of perspective on what it gives people. When I was sitting on the float, for anybody that's done this, you'll know, but. When I was sitting on the float and I'm got the Santa hat on and I'm waving, I would make a point of really trying to like look at the kids, and look them in the eye, and say, Merry Christmas. And there was something really, I'm getting goosebumps even thinking about it. There was something really crazy, awesome about that connection, because it was like, wow, because I think. In that moment, because you're part of the parade, you're like an extension of Santa Claus, right? You're an extension of the magic.
Yes,
in that moment, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that you recognize this little child, no matter what age they are, even some of the big kids, my age, were hey. But it was interesting. I thought, wow, to connect with kids and to make them smile was priceless in that moment, man. It was like, wow, I can make these kids smile.
Yeah.
And it was such a positive thing.
Yeah.
So I get it. I totally understand why Bob does it.
Yeah. And hopefully it comes back to him tenfold. Anything he does, I wish him all the best.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about Norma Jean's quite a bit. I want to bring up the King X thing here, because we've been talking about Norma Jean's, but you said and you're like, you haven't heard of King X?
King's X.
King's
yeah.
X. Sorry.
King's X, yeah.
King's X. Boris is gonna kill him. He's like, you haven't heard of King's X? But you said you booked them on a couple of shows, right?
Yeah, I did. I did 2 shows at Norma Jean's for them, one in 2 years, right? Once each year, and bought them back. But I had to do it myself because, a lot of people have never heard of the band, especially Jonathan. He never heard of the band at all. But I went ahead and did it because I was passionate about the band, because I knew how good they were. A great band. And my sons turned me on to that band, about 20 years ago. 25 years ago, something like that. And they turned me on to the band. And when I heard it, I said, who the hell is this? I'm listening to these CDs, and I'm going, oh, my God. And then when I booked them at Norma Jean's, I actually went out and saw them play live. And it's, I always knew it was a 3-piece band, but they all sing like birds. They all sing. Harmonies are unbelievable. you know, a lot of their stuff, a lot of Beatles influence to a certain extent, and some, and
Oh,
a lot
okay,
of their
interesting.
tunes, so for sure. And but live, the passionate and so precise. Like all the guys, they play with. Like the drummer's phenomenal, the guitar player phenomenal, and Doug, his voice, the bass player, is nuts.
Oh, we got a picture of Doug, right?
Yeah.
Jared, you got that? I think it's in the main folder. Yeah, there we go. There he is. Oh, and that's at Norma Jeans, eh? Is
Yeah,
that at Norma Jeans?
that's at Norma Jeans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't heard of them, and while we were sitting here, I fired up that Dogman tune, and man,
It's
it's
killer.
awesome. It's killer.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like it's timeless almost too. To be honest.
Oh
with you.
yeah, their material. Yeah, it's got a lot of depth. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Really good band. Yeah, I'd suggest anybody who listens to that band will be blown away.
Huh. What when you were booking bands, were you booking mostly in this area, or were you booking outside this area?
You know, outside the area too. I used to book a couple of top 40 bands actually through. I can't remember his name now. Guy in Toronto, anyway. This guy, and he used to book the Emirates bands over in the Emirates.
Oh, really?
And I had this band called Frame 3, and it was a trio, and they were a good top 40 band, very
And they would play in the
crowd-pleasing band.
Emirates.
Huh?
They would go and play in the Emirates.
They would go to the Emirates and play once a year, and then they would
Wow.
also go to Bermuda and play there once a year too, for 2-3 years in a row. And I had that band for a while, but they were
Wow.
a good band. But yeah, so but I wouldn't book the show. I'd have to go through somebody else to do it,
Right.
you know. So, and, I mean, that band was a really strong band, but it's just a trio. And I can't remember. There was a guy in that band that went on to do something else too, but I can't remember right now. But
Yeah.
anyway, good band though. Good band. So we did that, and I did a lot of one-nighters too, like outside, like in arena dates and stuff like that. You know, I rent the arena, like places like Hanover, King Carden, places like that, and they get a guy from an arena would say, "Oh, what have you got? What can you get for me?" And I would do like a honeymoon suite or Tom Cochrane or something like that, and book it, and then I hire the PA for the guy and send it down there. Probably hire the PA shop to
Yeah.
do some of those gigs for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I would do one-nighters like that for. And put a local band or something opening, on.
Do you remember where you met my dad?
I met him, I think at the PA shop. I met him because I remember him. He was in radio, and every time I went to
That's right.
Robbie Riccardi's house, he had have the radio poster on his.
That's right.
And Ron was in there. I said, "Is that Ron Schreins?" And he's, yeah, that's Ron Schreins. So I think I met him here, doing probably because I set bands up with PA. Like, where am I going to get a PA? Well, you go down to the PA shop. Like,
Yeah.
that's where you're going to get one.
Yeah, my grandmother still has that radio poster up
Yeah.
in her house. The shrine. She's got like the shrine. Applause, radio. There's like Applause was Gary McGill and my dad, and I think it was I'm not gonna get it right. Keyboard player, really good keyboard player, just passed away. And then the other guy's name will come to me. I'm slipping. But guy he went to high school with. But yeah, it's I wasn't around for any of that. I sort of came onto the scene when he was in Piranha Brothers.
Piranha, the Piranha Brothers. I remember that band.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the Piranha Brothers
With Danny Alien.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And they used to rehearse here, upstairs here. There was a spot in the back corner over there where they used to rehearse, and I would come here as a kid and listen to them rehearse. And that was sort of early days, and then saw them do a couple of gigs, and that sort of changed. The one gig, Western, I mentioned in a few episodes, sort of changed my life. And so I've always been really close to my dad and sort of the music stuff, but he stopped doing it at one point. It's focused more on the PA shop. The PA
Yeah.
shop was, was what was bringing in the money, and he had to. My brother was born in '86, so after '86, he's got two kids. He's got a wife and
Right.
family, and he's got to figure that out. So he did it for a little while after that, but some point I would say sort of towards the mid '90s, it sort of fizzled a
Yeah,
bit.
he didn't. It didn't do it much.
No, and
The older he got, the less he did it. But I do remember a time at the air show. We used to do a bands there.
That's right.
And I think Kim Mitchell was there or whatever. But I was in a band. I think it was called What's Your Point. But we.
I remember that band.
But we were doing the show on one of the smaller stages, and I remember the guitar player couldn't get through the crowd because there was a lineup of cars and he couldn't get there, and we were going on. And he's phoning me saying, "Oh, well, we're gonna be there. We're gonna be there. I'm gonna get there." So anyway, everybody else was there in the band, and I said, "Ron, can you play guitar?" He says, "No." I said, "I know you play bass." He says, "Yeah." I says, "Well, here's my bass. I'll play some songs on the guitar, and we'll get through. We'll do a couple of songs." And he did it.
Wow, I didn't even know that happened.
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, that's interesting. Was that Balloon Fest? That was the one in Harris Park, or that was the
No,
one at the airport?
it was at the air show.
The air show, yeah.
Yeah.
Or the airport, yeah.
Yeah, it was at the airport. I'm pretty sure it was.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
He'll probably remember that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure he'll remember. And then so around, I don't know if it was around that time or just after, but he did this, the Little Rock project. And it was like
Right.
a little country project. he did.
Right. Yeah.
And that was sort of,
With
that-
Sean Van Root.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. He should have. He talks about it all the time with Boris, and that they should have kept that going. But
Oh yeah, he loved that project. He really did. He thought that was going to be it.
Well-
because they had some good songs.
I still listen to the album. I still have a copy of it, and I still listen to it. And there were some great songs.
Yeah.
Like phenomenally good songs, especially at that time, because a big influence for him at that time. We had gone on a family trip, and there's a couple of country artists that had sort of inspired him at the time, and the one guy's name escapes me right now, but yeah, it was an interesting time because I had never listened to country in my life,
Right.
and I started at that same time. I started listening to it too, and it was fun, and it was a fun time again. And actually, you mentioned Rob Riccardi because Rob was, we did a music video, and we did part of the music video was in Rob's house.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was part of the music video that was in Rob's old house. So anyway, it's funny how the journey goes. Everybody keeps bugging me to get my dad on the show, and eventually I'll do that.
Does he still play, like actually like jam around with his
No.
bass? Like
No,
because
but he should.
I find the odd time I'll just sit in front of the TV and put a backing track on and just play.
We've been bugging him too. He will
Yeah.
he will when the time's right, when he's
Yeah.
ready for it.
Yeah.
But like you, I think there's part of me that I think he's seen behind the curtain a little bit, and
Right.
and he's focused sort of, like I said, on the business. He puts
Yeah.
100% of himself in the business.
Yeah.
He's there all day, all night. Somebody has to drive a truck, he'll jump in.
Yeah.
He's that kind of guy.
And that was it for me too. Business was a big part of it because I always took care of the bands. I was always like the leader guy that would take care of the bands. And the reason I did that was because I had 2 kids, and we had to keep the money coming in, to a certain extent. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, yeah, and he was in the same boat. That was what it was. He had to figure that out.
Yeah, yeah. Like in the Bully Band, for example, like we had our own 5-ton truck. We owned the PA.
Wow.
We owned the PA, and we had a 3-man crew at one time, and we paid everybody, and it travel here, out west, everywhere,
Wow.
So that was a big part of it too, because I remember I'd make $150 a week, and $150 for the PA, and and my partner would make the same as me, right? And then the other guys would just make $150, the other 2 guys a week. But even that you could live on to a certain extent, I mean,
At that time, yeah.
you weren't living high on the hog, that's for sure. But I mean, at least you got by,
Sure.
unless you drank too much, which
That happened, I'm
I
sure.
was in bands where guys would be in the hole at the end of the gig,
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a whole. Some of those vices, man, I'm sure took a
yeah,
lot of bands down.
yeah. Oh yeah,
You know.
for sure. Hard to
Sure.
stay away from yeah, especially the drugs. Like a lot of this one sound man. I won't mention names, but he was one of those guys who liked to keep his nose full,
Yeah.
and he'd do anything. We give him our card, like a credit card from the manager, and from our manager's credit card. He gave it to him and said, "If you ever need anything for the band, here's my card," and he'd be buying.
Oh man,
Yeah,
that's
bad.
dangerous.
Yeah, it was very dangerous.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah.
Not good. Um, what's the weirdest gig you've ever booked?
The weirdest gig.
Yeah. Or the most bizarre gig? Anything?
Nothing really comes to mind in terms of weird. And well, weird gigs in the old days were, playing in clubs with strippers on the stage dancing.
There you go,
like
yeah.
that was weird.
Because
Yeah.
that wouldn't happen today.
No, it wouldn't happen. But down playing in Toronto, down on Queen Street, the Broadview Hotel, and all these old hotels, and the band would go up, and then all of a sudden the strippers would come. I go, what the hell is this? So it was part of the gig, right? That's weird.
Yeah.
That was weird.
Yeah, that would have been an interesting time for sure. What was the most sort of? Did you book any of the acts that you were booking for any sort of famous people? Was there any sort of gigs that you booked for anybody that was sort of famous?
Famous people hiring bands, you mean?
Yeah.
No, not really. Well, the Chancellor of Germany booked 1964 once over in Germany, right?
Wow.
Actually, in Austria, in a casino, and it was the Chancellor of Germany at the time. I can't even remember the guy's name, to be honest with you, but that a very well known guy, and he was very good friends with Johnny Carson. This guy,
Oh, really?
yeah. But then,
Wow.
anyway, yeah, but that wasn't me. That was Jerry Blade that booked that.
Interesting. So, I think it's interesting that you didn't have any sort of contracts with these bands. I'm curious to know, because there's a behind the scenes of everything, right? There's things that people don't see,
Right.
and I'm curious to know, how you sort of tried to keep, because from what you've told me so far, obviously you've had there's been crossover between sort of personal relationships and business,
Right.
right? So how did you try to keep some of that separate?
Uh,
And was it difficult?
Actually, I found that easy as long as the person was open-minded.
Sure.
I found that pretty easy. I mean, a lot of the guys that I booked, I'm sure there's some people that didn't like agents and all that stuff, and I was very outspoken. That's one of the reasons I kept playing, is because like, you book a band and you tell them, no, you're doing this wrong, that these harmonies are wrong and stuff. I'd say stuff like that, and they say, what the hell do you know? You're an agent, like putting me down kind of thing.
Right.
You don't know who I am. What the hell are you telling me I'm an agent? I'm just telling you the truth. And that was one thing that was hard for me. You couldn't get along with it. Certain people you can get along with. Some people you just want to tell,
Yeah, hit the road.
yeah, don't want to deal with that.
Wow. Interesting. Were you ever in that position where you had to sort of say, okay, I'm done?
Oh yeah, like I wouldn't book the band. Oh yeah, I've been in positions where I said to the band, listen, go find somebody else. I don't want to deal with you. That's it. And I concentrate on the bands that I did want to deal with, And I still, to this day, a lot of the bands that I booked, I'll come back and shake my hand, and it's a good experience. It was a good experience for them, and it was a good experience for me, because they were friends to a certain extent, They were. we got along really good, and most of the time I got along pretty good with the people that I worked with. You know, especially bands.
Yeah, I was on my way in today, and Stan was on his way out. He was taking off, and he's like, "Tell Brian I say hi."
Oh,
And,
okay.
and you know, because and I mean, he would have been in Bob Noxious probably when you were booking
Yeah. Oh,
Bob,
yeah.
right? At
Yeah.
that
There
time.
was, yeah. Very at the first part. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
And he, man, he was good in that band, man.
he was.
He was very good in that band.
Stan's a great bass player.
Oh yeah.
He is a great bass player.
Solid bass player.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
How have I mean you've sort of gone through like, sort of 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s now. 80s and 90s, like to me, like I said, I met you in the 90s, so to me, like, my frame of reference is like 90s, kind of 90s on. I mean, I do have some recollection of the 80s, but most of it was just hanging out with my dad and
Right.
watching his band and stuff like that. But how did things sort of shift from the 80s to the 90s to the early 2000s during the time that you were doing the active talent thing? How did things sort of shift when you were booking people? Like what changed through that period?
I think the main thing that changed is that a band could work a full week when that started back in the 80s. You could book a band a front end for 3 days, and then they'd go and do a two-nighter. But that changed once it hit, late 90s into the year 2000. I mean, that never happened anymore. So bands couldn't work a whole week. So you couldn't really live,
Yeah.
live on the money that you earned, right? But back then you could. Because you could find front end. I mean, I can remember booking Honeymoon Suite many times in Eddie's for $800 for 3 nights, a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Wow.
You
That's
know?
wild.
Yeah, and then they would have 2 one-nighters or something after that. But they always wanted to work. You kept the bands going. Like bands like that were. Honeymoon Suite was an easy sell back then because. They had songs on the radio all the
Yeah,
time.
that's right.
You
And
know?
I did a bunch of dates with them. They did one in Clinton. I can't remember them. I'll never remember them all. But back in the 90s, early to mid 90s,
Clinton, was it a club?
It was what was it? It was a hotel, I think.
The Elm Haven.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that might have been it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were doing it. It was me and Jimmy Shaw, I think, and I was doing lights and he was doing sound, and I just remember it was a really crappy load-in. Most places were back then.
Yeah, they were.
Obviously, no place was really designed at that time still
No.
for what we do, right? And of course, our gear was all big and.
Yeah, and you had to work your way around the pool tables and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Oh yeah, but that was everywhere, and we made it work no matter where we
Yeah.
went, right? That's interesting though, because there's a lot of people that are going to watch this and going to go, bands could play all week long.
Yeah.
Because it's been a while. It's been a minute since
I
that.
think that's the biggest change, though, because now, a band's happy to go out and play once a week, or once a month. A lot of bands do a gig, but they can do that because they got a job.
That's right. But do you think that because there's people that would say, well, because they're only playing once a month, they're not focused on the music.
To a certain extent, that would be right. Yeah, that would be true to a certain extent. Because when you're on the road, I mean, you get a lot more of that. You're more of a family, and you learn stuff together. And we used to record all the time, have a 4-track on the road, and have a 4-track machine. And after the club owners, a lot of club owners, the room was isolated from the hotel part, and they would let you rehearse after the gig. So you rehearse, you record songs, and it was a lifestyle, and a lot of the times we would even back in the day, especially the Elvin days with Dan and that, we would have a cassette machine, and it would be on for the whole night, and then we go, and the same with Bully too, be on for the whole night. And we would go back to the room, and we would sit and listen to the whole night and pick it apart. You know, oh, this is right. That sounds good. Well, why does that sound good? Well, why does it sound like shit? You know what I mean? And you
Dialing it
build,
in.
and and when you build on that.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're playing
smart.
once, when you're playing once a month or once every 2 weeks, you know, you don't get a chance to do that with the guys.
No.
You know,
And you're not
everybody
as
does the
polished.
gig and everybody goes home, right?
And you're not as polished.
No.
And there's all those little things too,
No.
because I've been with bands on the road a little bit, and you know, as you play more and more and more gigs, you know, you refine things. Things
Yeah.
get more refined.
Yes, absolutely.
But the more that gets spread out,
Yeah.
it doesn't. Like, you get these sort of, I guess, habits that become bad because you never really correct them, like what you guys were doing.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I mean, we used to go out and see other bands, and even, you know, they would be good bands a lot of the time, but you'd always find something that they did wrong because you're a musician, so you fucking nitpick all the time. Oh, that guy. But you learned what not to do. So that's one thing that I always say. Learning what not to do is probably a big thing that you'll learn being a musician.
Yeah.
You know, because you see other guys do it, and you go, oh no, that's not. Like the guys that play between songs and diddle around on their instrument, or the drummer going like between songs. I hated that.
There's a lot of people that do.
I hated that.
There's a bunch of people that do. I've seen it
Yeah.
before, where certain producers that are also, you know, writers and musicians, they say that flat out to people. They say, like, rehearse at home.
Yeah.
You know.
Don't be tiddling around. You know.
Yeah. I get that to an extent, because you're putting on a show.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And it's the parts even in between that you have to try to keep the audience's attention.
Yeah, but you don't realize that until you're in the crowd and you see that going on, and you go, oh, that's not good. that's not good. You know?
Yeah, no, it's true. And you know, I've been there. I've seen both sides of that coin.
Yeah.
I've seen it where it's you know, where it's off, and you know, in some extreme cases, a bit of a train wreck. And then I've seen it where it's like uber polished, like insanely polished, and
Right.
to the point where, you know, that Eagles show that I went to with my dad not that long ago in Detroit, you know, where he goes on Facebook and says, that's the best show I'm ever going to see. And it was because exactly what you just said,
Yeah.
but only from our standpoint as a production company. He's a musician as well, so he's looking at the musicianship,
Right.
all of that, but he's also looking at the sound, the lights, even the you know, I guess I asked him, I'm like, why did you say that? And he's like, even the camera angles, just every single thing. Like, yeah. And you know my dad, so you know, like, he's just analyzing every single thing.
Yeah.
And there was just nothing he could find that was imperfect. It was just perfect. And so he said, you know, he went online and said, yeah, that's the best show I'm ever going to see. I'm never going to see that again. And his other comment was interesting. He said, he says, Ryan, it's hard enough to get a band with 2 guitar players that sing together. He
Right.
goes, try to find one with 6.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
he says it'll never happen again.
Yeah. And vocals, to me, were always that's the foremost of any band. Vocals have to be good.
Yeah.
You know, vocals and the drummer have to be good, because you can't build anything unless that's together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the vocals is a big thing, especially with, you know, when you talk about keeping the dance floor packed, or even just being even in a festival situation. Everybody wants to sing along.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to connect and be a part of it. And if the vocals aren't there, if the vocals aren't tight, if it's not, doesn't sound like the album, or it's not sound like the album, but if it's not, because people are accepting of that obviously as time goes on, but you know, the vocals have to be good.
Yeah.
You know, my dad did Blues Fest, and the one guy from Toto.
Yeah.
His name escapes me right now, but
I think I saw that show.
he was struggling. You know,
Yeah.
his voice was kind of blown out, and he was struggling a little bit to sort of hit any of those notes, and he wasn't. He was just sort of holding the mic out to the crowd, and it was a moment, you know, for me and my dad, because we both loved that band and all those songs, and I grew up listening to my dad play all those songs in
Right.
Piranha Brothers.
Right.
And So, that was a bit of a drag, but good in a sense that, he was there and he made the best of it and he tried and it was good to meet him. And, but, yeah, it was, it can go either way, but I think
Yeah.
the more polished you can be, the better the experience can be.
Speaking of polished, last night I went on YouTube, and this band that I used to book at Norma Jean's through Ralph James at the agency, Rival Sons. You heard of them?
Oh yeah, of course.
Rival Sons. And I remember doing some of the first dates. He used to phone me up. I need a date for this band. I just put them on an opening spot. Yeah, just give me $300. I don't care what it is. And I put them on at Norma Jean's. And I went down and saw the band. And I fucking blew my mind, that band. It was unbelievable. Unbelievable. I phoned Ralph the next day. I said, man, I want that band back. I want that band. Anytime you want me to book that band, you call me, right? Anyway, I went online and saw this latest thing. This within the last month, I think this is. And it's a live recording. They're playing live, and it's about an hour of music in some lighthouse kind of building. It's a building, but it's like on the water.
Yeah.
And they're inside, and they got this light show going on and stuff inside. And that singer, everybody in that band is like unbelievably good, but the singer, this guy, is like bang on, like
Wow.
note-wise. Like it really, really, you should check it out.
I will.
It's really new. It's just come out, I think, actually.
Wow, right. Yeah, I remember Rival Sons, and I remember they were booked in a bunch of different spots in the area back in the day. Because it wasn't just Norma Jean's. Because I didn't see them at Norma Jean's, but I saw them. I saw them a couple of places.
They played Norma Jean's twice, I think. I had them there twice.
Yeah.
But they were really, really good. I mean, I had them there for $500. They came back on the next tour, which was a couple of months later, and they got $1,000. And then after that, they were a hit. I couldn't even buy them. It was they went through the roof in Europe and all these other places. They did really, really, really well. But I think that band's from L.A. I think they're from L.A. That band.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
What's something that if people are looking to get an agent, what's something that they should look for or look out for?
Geez, I wouldn't know anymore because to get a good agent, I mean, you have to, I mean, that's all, you have to go by feel to a certain extent, right? You sit down with somebody and he's either going to bullshit you and you have to make up your mind whether you want to sign with this guy or not. Like, I mean, that's what it comes down to now. I mean, because I don't think there's any small agents anymore out there.
Right.
Now it's all the biggies. So it's a battle. They've got their pick of anybody they want to hire. But I would say watch what you sign. That's the first thing, is watch what you sign. What are they going to guarantee you to a certain extent? How often are you going to be working? Can you have an out clause on that contract that says when if this isn't done and we're not making X amount of money or we're not getting booked on certain shows, especially with headliners getting opening shows and stuff like that, because that's how they'll get them. I can get you on opening shows. That's the whole thing, right?
Right.
But I mean, the one thing is, I mean, you got to go by ear to a certain extent in that regard. I mean, it's feel.
When do the big guys get too big? Like, and not in a sense of like their stature or anything, but just the sheer amount of artists they're trying to book. Because I have to imagine that it becomes like there becomes a point when certain artists just don't get booked because they're at the bottom of the pile.
Well, no, yeah, for sure, and they have to make and they will probably just leave the agent, I would think.
Yeah.
Or they should be smart enough to leave if they're not getting work.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's stupid. If you're not getting work, what are you there for? I mean, that doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of bands would burn bridges by doing certain shit too, like drinking too much on stage or whatever, like, people showing up drunk, they'll never get back, or being too loud, that's another. Speaking of being loud, I went to see, was it Big Sugar? Oh, no, Big Sugar. What's his name?
Gordie Johnson.
Yeah, I saw him down at that, The Drink He was just there about a month ago or something.
Yeah, yeah.
I went down there. I walked, and then they got a Neanderthal Fred Flintstone. I think put the PA in there. These old boxes, and I was sitting in there about halfway back. It was so goddamn loud. It was unbelievably
Nothing's
loud.
changed then.
No, they were always loud, but this was unbelievable. It was unbearable.
Well, that was Gordy's amp behind you right there. That amp behind you, that was
Marshall.
that was Gordy's amp.
Oh yeah.
He gifted it to John Angus, and I bought it from John.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, and so like I say, nothing's changed because I
No.
worked with Gordy and the Big Sugar guys back in the '90s, and it was loud.
Yeah.
There's
It
a,
was loud.
There's
man.
a story that Jimmy Shaw tells about.
And it's a
them.
three-piece band. So when
Yeah.
it's loud, it's loud.
Oh, Gordy on his own was loud.
Yeah.
There's a story that Jim Shaw used to tell that we were doing a show in at the John Labatt Pavilion in Harris Park, which is gone now, and we were doing this show, and Jim was at the board, and I was at my light board, and I was programming the lights, and the PA was off, and the sound check was done, and Gordy was just up there messing with his rig or something, and he was alone. There was no one else on the stage. And there's this guy from the city who comes out with a meter, you know, the meter kid. And he comes out with the meter, and he's standing at front of house metering, and Gordy's messing with his rig. And the PA's off.
Right.
And the guy's like, Gordy fires up the rig, and he's you know, wailing away. And this was early days, so he was like, you know, not holding back, doesn't care. And it's outdoors. And the he's yelling at Jim, you got to turn it down. You got to turn it down.
Oh, no. And the PA was off.
And Jim's like, he just looks at him, and he puts his finger on the master fader of the board, and it's off, right? And he puts his finger down, and he goes, it's off,
Right.
It's off. And he's like, and just I'll never forget. I was standing like 3 feet away from this guy, and just white. He just goes white, and Jim goes, "You should just go home, man."
Yeah.
That was it. And he did. He left the
Yeah.
park. He
I don't
was
blame
done.
him.
That was it. Because it was just Gordy's guitar rig.
That's great.
And he was already over the decibel limit at front of house with no PA.
Oh, God. That's funny.
So it was, I got a few of those stories, but like but that was the sound. Like
Yeah.
that was, as a fan, you expected that at a Big Sugar show at that time.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, this was the Gordy Johnson. I mean, he did some of the old blues stuff from the first records that
That's right.
he was doing.
Yeah.
And they did two sets, an hour set of the old blues stuff, and then they come on and do, you know, like.
I love that stuff.
Yeah, and then they do. But the old blues stuff was really killer, like
Oh.
all the Delta stuff that he does.
So
And the
good.
sound, like his guitar sounded great. I just had to get back and go to the back of the room. I couldn't find it. I couldn't sit in front of the cabinets. There's no
I
way.
get it. I totally get it. Speaking of, so I want to talk about venues a little bit. Back when I worked with, so back in the 90s, I did a stint at the NAC, and I was the lighting guy. My dad had sort of the deal with Siva and John, and we used to do all the shows there. Big Sugar being one of them.
Right.
And but venues that you sort of booked, because you started. When did you start? You started booking when, in the 80s?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was, because people talk about the old venues. So people talk about Call the Office, they talk about the Embassy, they talk
Right.
about these places, right? But they're gone, and the generation now that's gigging, even Jeremy who's hanging out back there, these guys, I mean, I don't know if any of them were even around back then, but what was it like sort of back then, 80s, late 80s, early 90s, with booking in some of these sort of places? What was that like with these sort of places?
I don't know. The venue, I mean, you know, I mean, there's so many weird venues, you know. I mean, Call the Office was brutal. I mean, there's so many of them. Even Freifogel's in the old days, Freifogel's was a horrible setup room. It was like long, and you're playing right to the wall, you know, stuff like that. So there wasn't really many great venues back then. There really wasn't.
People
you
were
know?
just making it work.
Yeah, they were making it work, and who had to make it work mostly was the sound people, really, because a lot of the times the bands didn't give a shit. They just plug in, and they sounded good on stage. That's all they cared about.
Yeah.
You know, they wouldn't turn down. You could say to a band back anytime, you say, well, listen, if you guys turn down, I can make it sound really good. No band wants to hear that, but it's true.
Mm.
You know, it's very true, you know,
Yeah.
but nobody wants to hear that. But they're,
Especially the guitar player.
yeah. A good venue, years and years, going back years, was probably the old City Hall.
Oh, interesting. I never.
The old
obviously
City Hall was
I
a
wasn't
nice,
around,
a nice
but
big stage, and
I've heard of it.
yeah, and it was a killer venue, that place.
Interesting.
Yeah. I remember playing there in the Bully Band. We were upstairs, and the Stewart brothers were playing downstairs in the lounge, right? They were
Interesting.
doing their thing. I remember that.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because, you know, I remember it being a weird sort of time, like even Kipling's. I want to get Earl Taylor on the show at some point, but Kipling's was such a weird venue too.
Yeah,
You
with
know?
the bar right in front of the stage, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there was like, what was it, like 30 feet of room in front of the stage? That was it? It was nothing.
And then a thin corridor, basically, where people sat.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't a great.
But like, look at all the bands they had
yeah,
there.
oh yeah.
Crazy.
It didn't matter. Look at Freifogels, the same thing. All the good bands they had in there, that's going way back. But I mean, you know, they had a lot of really good bands playing there.
Yeah.
You know, but it didn't matter. You had to make it work, no matter what the room was.
Yeah. Right.
You know, you had to make it work. That's all there was to it. You know, and I think a part of that is having a good relationship with who's ever doing sound.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you think there's room right now for more venues?
No, because it'll just be top 40 bands. If there was venues that would just cater to original bands, that would be great.
Yeah.
But they don't have that anymore.
Why do you think that is?
Because people aren't making money doing it, I guess. You know, like booze is so expensive. You know, for somebody to, you know, to sell booze in a club. And then they have to put, now you see how much money they have to put on the door. You see all these bands now, like East Sides, for example. You go there and you got to pay $5 to $10 to see a top 40 band. It was never like that before. You pay $5 or $10 to see a tribute band.
Right.
That's how that's changed. You know, a normal band goes in there and it's a $5 cover charge. And and they have to do that because, you know, people they don't buy as much booze, for one thing. They just don't. They just don't have the in their budget to go in there and drink six beers in a night. You know, but so they get them before you know, they get them at the door. We'll make our money off the door. We'll pay the band.
Yeah.
And then that's it. That way they don't have to go in their pocket.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And and it's funny you mentioned it that way because I never really thought about the whole, and I guess you would as the agent knowing this, but like I never really had thought about the separation between a top 40 band versus a cover band.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't realize there was sort of a separation
Oh,
there.
there definitely is a separation there because, you know, why do people become tribute bands, or why do guys, you know, form tribute bands? Because they think they're going to make more money. But that depends on the tribute.
Right.
You know, I mean, I've seen it with Doug Vardy makes great money playing with the Rod Stewart band that he's got.
That's right.
But the best band I've ever seen him in, tribute band, was that I forget what it was called. A Bad Company tribute, Fab Company or so. Anyway,
Okay. Yeah.
I can't remember the name. Anyway, yeah, and he was in that band. I saw him at the music hall, and it was a great band. I thought, fuck. And I told him, I said, Doug, you're going to make a lot of money from this band. Well, how wrong was I? You couldn't get gigs for that band.
Wow. Interesting. I
And
wonder.
Paul Rogers, that's the one that he does that really well.
I wonder if it's just because just people, you know, the people are getting older and they're not coming out for that, you know, that band anymore.
Well, they come out for Rod Stewart, and that's older than that. But then he's still going, right? That's.
I think the
thing.
Rod Stewart thing caters to the corporate crowd a bit too, though, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. The
He
same as the Western Fair. I used to do a lot of stuff in there with like Tina Turner tributes and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a corporate sort of corporate party crossover
Yeah,
thing there, right, with Rod. Because I booked him for a corporate event,
right.
doing Rod,
Yeah,
and it went over phenomenally.
yeah,
So I think there's that, right?
yeah,
But that's interesting. So, because London, I've had a couple of people on that have mentioned what you said earlier about London needing, some places to support the local scene,
yeah.
the up and coming. I've seen a few activations kind of happen at Poacher's Arms. I know they're doing some stuff, but I think it's becoming more and more difficult, because things are becoming more and more expensive. You got the price of
Yeah.
insurance for these guys
Yes.
is insane,
Yeah,
if they can even get it.
yeah,
And I think that all of the various costs associated with keeping the doors open have gone up. Again, the stuff that you don't see behind the scenes
no,
have gone up to the point where it becomes really difficult to put bands in there if they're not going to fill the bar.
no,
You
no,
know?
and yeah, and club owners they always want they always want the place packed, but it's pretty hard to do that nowadays.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's getting harder and harder.
Yeah.
Bands are, and I was going to bring it up at some point, but I'll bring it up now. I think social media, it's a blessing and a curse
Yes.
in many ways. What's your perspective on that? Because I think that's sort of helped some of the young bands develop followings, but I'm not sure if that's translating into consistent gigs or not. But what's your perspective on sort of social media and how that's sort of affected it all?
Well, I mean, the one thing about social media is that people can get their stuff out there, but it's still got to be good, and it's still got to be quality, And there's not a lot of bands that get it to that. You know what I mean? They'll put shit on there is what they'll do,
Yeah.
and it won't go anywhere. So it doesn't do anything for bands that are shitty anyway. But a lot of the times it's filled up with that. And only the good bands with good sound, good songs are going to get hits, and so it will build, and they'll get more and more hits, and they get more and more views, right? I think that's the only way. But if you're not a good band, I wouldn't even put it on YouTube, to be honest with you, because there's a lot of shit on YouTube.
There's a lot.
I mean, the bands that they put their stuff on YouTube because they're playing at a club and they have some guy videotaping it, and the video shit and everything shit, but they'll put it on there anyway, and all it is junking up YouTube is basically what they're doing.
And it's funny because a lot of that stuff is the first stuff that your management company, if you get signed, will pull down.
Yes.
They'll just pull all that down. This can't be seen.
No, right. No. And and a lot of the bands that go on there and put their stuff on there, they just want to be on there. They don't care if it's good or bad.
Do you think part of it is acceptance? Do you think part of it's relevance? Like they're just trying to stay relevant and they don't have any other content to put up. So, well, this is all we got. So here it goes.
Well, they got nowhere else for people to see them, right? So that's their only option.
That's a valid point. Yeah, that's a very, very valid point. It's interesting because I see, I'm connected to, shout out to Aaron Allen. I saw Aaron put up a post, and he does these writers rounds all the time. But the country scene does a pretty good job of that, of putting together these nights that
Right.
That support the songwriters and that get them some stage time and some exposure
Right,
to people. I'm not familiar with the same thing for any other genre, to be honest. Country seems to be the only, or singer songwriter sort of seems to be the only.
The country scene. I never really booked that. Tim Hicks, I booked him once on Norma Jeans, but never really booked that much country.
But even in the rock,
years.
even in the rock sort of thing, even now, I'm not familiar with anybody that's doing that. That's saying, hey, I'm gonna I'm gonna have 4 or 5 bands.
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring these young bands in, and I don't see that happening.
I think what you got to do now is if a band's got good songs and they're in and they really believe in their material, you'd be better off not playing clubs. You'd be better off going somewhere in a hall or and hiring a company to tape them live. To do that live and get it to a point where when you put it on YouTube, it'll at least mean something.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's you're better off doing that than going to your local club and getting your buddy to hold up his phone and
Yeah.
video the show and then put it on YouTube. If you do it more take it in a more at a more professional level and hire the right people to do it, you're more likely to get good exposure.
What a different. It's interesting because we just finished talking about the 70s and all that and how it was back then. What a different time it is, eh?
Oh yeah.
For all this, talking about, hey, we should rent a hall and set up cameras. To even get cameras back then was impossible. You know what I mean?
No, and it's crazy now. You see where the technology has gone. And I see some of these consoles that they have now, like Cam Butler. You know Cam Butler.
Mm-hmm.
Cam Butler was on he's a friend of mine on Facebook, and there was this board that he just bought, some board, and he's going through the module, and it's doing everything, like all these faders moving all over the place and stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And then you can take once you've got a good mix, you can save it.
That's right.
Like man, who'd have thought you could do that 20 years
we've
ago?
Well, I'll tell you a couple things. So we've got consoles starting at $500 to $1,000 that can do that now.
Yeah.
All the way up to the one we bought for, shout out to Al from 3 Days Grace. We bought a Digico Quantum for them to use at front of house. I won't tell you how much it is, but it's worth as much as a house almost.
Right.
And it's definitely worth more than some people's houses.
Yeah.
But it's unbelievable console. But it just blows your mind now, the difference, right? Like we used to have to carry around these consoles that we were massive.
Yeah.
I remember the Soundcraft Series 5s and the Midas consoles. We had an XL200B. Those consoles were huge and heavy, and we figured out how 2 of us could push it up a ramp, mind you. But yeah, those consoles are crazy. But like the technology has totally changed to the point where where now, look at, like, we're doing this show, but like you used to have a broadcast studio.
Yeah.
Same with recording audio. Now you were talking about the 4-track back in the day. That was more as like a demo.
Yeah.
But now you can, with a laptop and an interface and a couple microphones, you're recording.
Yeah.
So the technology piece definitely has changed the game for a lot of people. But like you said about YouTube, you're a minnow in an ocean, because now everybody with a laptop can create content. So what cuts through, and I think that's what you're alluding to, is the content quality, but the song quality, the performance quality, everything has to be bang on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't be slack when it comes to the quality, and especially the songwriting too. I mean, what some people think is a good song, some bands think everything they write is a good song, and they don't know how to weed out the good from the bad because they don't have that much material. Most people who write good songs don't write a dozen songs. They write 500 to 1,000 songs, and then they might do a CD. You know what I mean?
Right. And this is true, and I've heard this from a number of people. I've mentioned it on a few times on this show, but before Chicago had like a major worldwide hit, they had 10 albums.
Right. There you go.
So, case in point. But I think that the technology is a good thing. It's a great thing. Social media can be a great thing, but they're all tools.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's
but
still
you have to know how to use them too.
Well, it's still you. It's still you. It's still your songs, your emotion, your story. at the end of the day. And you know, so here's an interesting question. So how do bands weed out? How do you weed out songs? Because you're so connected to it. Like it's
Like
difficult.
if I was writing
Yeah.
songs, well, I haven't done it in so long. So I mean, the last time I wrote a song was actually during COVID. I went out and bought an 8-track machine, and I wrote, 10 songs, and I had a lot of fun doing it. But I hadn't written a song in 30 years.
And what was it like?
It was fun, but I mean, they weren't great songs. But I mean, 2 or 3 of them I can still play over and over, and I go, yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad.
Hmm.
But they're not great songs. But I mean, it's my own material, and I feel good that I did it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had no idea about recording or anything. Like my son's done a lot of recording, and so he does the same thing, like over and over, like recording songs and listening back and changing them and stuff like that. But I was never into recording at all. Always when my partner Paul was in Bully he was the guy.
Right.
Like he was totally he was co-producer of the first album. So I just wanted to make sure I did good parts, and then I wanted to get out of the studio as quick as possible
Hmm.
and go home and have a good meal. That's what I wanted to do. But some people are different. I mean, I was just if I was happy with my track, that was it. Because I left it to Paul. Because he'd weed out the good from the bad. Because he was the producer guy.
Right.
He knew he was, and we wrote songs together. But I trusted him, even if I was a songwriter of one of the songs. I would trust him with my life, with my songs for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's the family relationship, like you say, right? That
Yeah.
you get into,
Yeah,
where you trust
absolutely.
each other.
Absolutely.
Did you book a lot of festivals?
Yeah, I did quite a few festivals. The Air Show, the Balloon Fest, and stuff like that. I did that, and there was some of that Jonathan put on that Blues Fest. Sometimes I would do a festival for him, but that was in that parking lot place downtown where that Blues Fest.
Yeah.
Oh, horrible venue.
Yeah.
But and he did one at the Western Fair outside too at one point, and it was pretty good. I mean, we got some pretty good response to that. But I never did a lot of festivals though. I mainly booked a lot of clubs.
Clubs.
Is
Yeah.
what I did. Yeah.
And the club scene has obviously shifted, but did festivals impact the club circuit?
I don't really think so because a lot of the festivals ended and people would go to clubs after the festivals, right?
Right.
So sometimes it was good for the club,
Okay.
depending on where they were in the city,
Yeah.
But they would end at 11 o'clock at night. Well, most places didn't start dance till 10 anyway, so they missed the first set. Big deal,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Interesting. Yeah, because there's people who've been on that sort of said like, oh, festivals have, but could be genre specific, but festivals have sort of hurt the club market.
no, I don't. Yeah, I can't see that.
Is there anything that you think has hurt the club market?
Not having enough good bands, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think not having enough strong acts. A lot of the bands wanted to play so they could bring their friends out to see them. And it didn't matter, the quality of the band. They just wanted to get up there. And a lot of people, like in the old days that played a bit, they would put a band together, 20 years later and go out and want to relive their youth, basically, right? And
Sure.
go to a club. And then they'd invite all their friends out and stuff. Now, the band was probably all right sometimes. Sometimes they were all right, but most of the time it wasn't a good thing. That's
Right.
what I found anyway.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, yeah, I would. There's definitely a big part of me that would agree with you for sure. I mean, I rarely go out to clubs anymore,
No, I don't either.
and but I also rarely
But you're a lot younger than me, though.
but I
do that.
rarely connect with a band
Yeah.
too. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of, I listen to a lot of older music still,
Right.
right? I'm having a hard time finding newer music. There's a
Yes.
few that I found lately,
Yeah.
but it's interesting. I think that, I talked earlier about distractions. I think there's young people nowadays have access. The technology has given access, and you have access to a lot of other things, right? You have access to cryptocurrency, you have access to gaming like you've never had before. I mean,
Right.
when we started, me and my little brother, and we're not even that old, when we started, we didn't have hardly any games, Duke Nukem and, our PC, desktop PC at home and
Atari.
whatever. Yeah, Nintendo. I still have my original Nintendo, but it wasn't like it is now. It's totally different. And so, gaming and cryptocurrency, you got 16-year-olds mining cryptocurrency. Like, what is going on? So the technology has given access to things that are now taken up time.
Yeah.
And I think that that's time that, maybe typically would be used to learn an instrument. And
Yeah.
so good on your son for teaching.
Yeah.
We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
That's pretty, because the more, I think the more young people that can become really passionate, like not just enjoy music or enjoy learning it or enjoy it. Like my daughter, she's 5, she's learning how to play the piano, and that's awesome. But there'll become a tipping point where I'm going to encourage her to sing, to take vocal lessons, and to see if she can become really passionate about it.
Right.
And I think that that's the difference. Like my parents tried to get me to take piano. I went to Yamaha, the conservatory. It was not for me at all.
Right.
There was nothing really passionate about it. And because then I would watch my dad, and shout out to Kevin Weidman. Kevin was playing keys, and Kevin at one point I think taught me a little bit of piano, and but I learned how to do lights, and I learned how to DJ, and I learned how to do these other things, and I sort of went off in that direction. So I didn't gravitate as much to the piano thing.
Right.
And fast forward, now I'm starting to learn guitar and other things, but that's some of that is you got to stick with it, and you got to try and find a way. Like it didn't work out at Yamaha, so maybe and we tried a couple other things that just maybe wasn't the right time for me. But we did the same thing with my daughter. She didn't work out with the first teacher, didn't work out with the second teacher, but now with the third one,
She connected.
Yeah, and it's going.
That's important. Yeah,
and it's
that's
going
very
great.
Important. Yeah.
So I think that there's something to be said about that. Is you just have to find the right fit, because it's especially at that age when you're super young, it's got to be fun. It can't be too overbearing.
Yeah.
That's what I noticed about some of the teachers she had, and and because it's an emotional thing, man. It's an emotional journey, this thing we call music.
Yeah. Well, the thing you say, that it's got to be fun, and that's the one thing you got to see. If you teach a kid how to play a song before you teach a kid how to play scales, how to play this, how to play that, teach them chords and how chords relate to songs, that's a good thing. My son gets a lot of his students from the academy students, where they've been going to the academy for like 2 years, and then they go to him, and within 2 months they're playing songs, and their parents say to Tim, he can play songs. He's been at the academy for 2 years. How come they don't get it? But if you're passionate about it, you got to show them the passion by putting the music to good use right off the bat.
Yeah.
You don't want to be sitting there playing, I mean, there's a time that you learn scales and notes and everything, but you teach a kid, how to play chords and chord progressions, and they can learn, and then he says, go back to YouTube and apply this to songs. There's tons of songs that you can play now.
Sure.
And they do that, but they still come back to the lessons.
Absolutely.
And you'd think that, fuck, you realize, they go to YouTube, I'll never get them back. Yeah, you will. You get them back because you've taught them this far, so you've given them a path. You've shown them a path to make music,
Exactly.
and that's and I think that's a very important thing.
It is. It is. And I think it's interesting because I think that in my case, it was pretty formal in the beginning. And I think that there's young people that are disciplined enough to jump on that. And,
Yes.
they become very talented pianists, right? And awesome.
Yeah,
But that's rare.
yeah,
Very rare.
very
It-
rare.
It's more likely that you're like Paul McCartney, where you can't even barely read music,
Right.
but you're passionate and you write these songs that are just connect with people.
You got to feel the songs. You got to feel the chords you're playing, and once you get that feel, it won't go away.
Yeah,
It'll just get better and better and better.
you need to get hooked. And I think I guess what I'm saying and you're saying is like, there's a time and a place for the theory,
Yes.
and I think it's. I don't get me wrong. I think it's super important, but in my case, it doesn't matter if you don't connect. If
No.
you're not, if you don't become passionate about it and you don't latch on. And there's an empowerment thing to it too. I think, depending on what you go through in your younger life as a kid, if you can learn a song, especially a song that you really like, and play it,
Oh yeah.
it's like that. There's something about, you're so young, you can't do nothing. You can't drive a car, you can't do nothing,
Yeah.
but you can play this
Yeah.
song, this music, and it makes people light up.
Yeah.
There's something about that I think
Yeah.
is magical. And you're right. I think that Tim's way of approaching it is the right way,
Yeah.
in my opinion, for the
Yeah.
average person.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned it earlier, radius clauses, because I had a friend of mine the other day, and this isn't the only reason, but he lives in Hamilton, and he's Hamilton's been going through some stuff, and his particular industry, I think he's sort of done everything he can do there. But he's looking to maybe make a move, and we've been talking about London and what's going on here, and he said one of the things he mentioned to me, even just I think it was yesterday, is he's like, there's just nothing good going on here. There's no concerts, there's no comedy, there's nothing going on, and I know about radius clauses because I'm in the biz, but
Right.
he's not as he's in a different area of the business. He doesn't maybe realize this, and I haven't talked to him about it yet. But because he's in Hamilton, anybody getting booked in Toronto, you're not getting booked in Hamilton because of the radius clause in a lot of these things. So
What do you mean radius clause in terms of what?
in terms of being booked, so there's certain and again, could be genre specific, but I'll give you an example. So in the world that I used to come from in dance music, if a dance act would get booked in Toronto, like a big DJ, let's say, would get booked in Toronto at a club in Toronto, then they would have a radius in the contract that they signed with that promoter or that venue,
Right.
There'd be a radius clause that says, hey, you can't this act cannot get booked within an hour, let's say,
Yeah.
of this venue,
Right.
And it just so happens that Hamilton is kind of gets caught in that sometimes.
Really? I never heard of that.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
The only radius clause I ever heard of is if if Ian Thornley comes to town and plays, you can't play within 100 miles or something. Your next gig, whatever. That's the only thing.
Well,
I've
I mean, 100 miles would be an hour, right?
yeah,
So that's what it would be.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's
So I've seen that, but I've never been involved and had a radius clause unless the contract comes through and they say, hey, there's a radius clause. We can't play your gig because we're playing here, and
see,
then,
in
then I couldn't
London,
get 'em.
London, we generally, I'm not going to say for sure because I know there's been some insane radius clauses that I've heard of in dance music that are just stupid.
Yeah.
That even they couldn't get them booked in London if they didn't sign they had to book it through the guys in Toronto.
Right.
See what I'm saying?
Right.
Bit of politics there, but anyway,
Yeah,
there's.
I've never heard of
But
that.
that's
weird.
But that's I know that's been a thing, and so I have a feeling that there's some of that going on in Hamilton because Hamilton's pretty close to Toronto,
Right.
and there could be some of that going on.
But this is relating to dance.
Well, in my experience, it
yeah.
is. But I know that I have a feeling that a lot of the same players that are in the not to mention any names, but there's some big promoters that are in the game that will do this
Right.
because they want to get the bookings.
Right.
Well, if you're going to book them, you're going to book them through us
Oh,
because
I see.
we have them at our venues in the GTA.
Right.
Right. So I think that's part of what's going on there. Now, thankfully, where we are here in town, we're 2 hours away.
Yeah.
So we generally don't experience this.
No.
Right? It's not a thing here. And
No.
and
Yeah.
actually,
I can see how Hamilton relates to
yeah.
Toronto. Yeah.
And so I think that, we've been sort of immune to some of that. And I think that that's great because, nowadays we have the Canada Life Place, formerly Budweiser Gardens, formerly John Labatt Center, which has brought us a ton of amazing acts that we've been able to see there. And Centennial Hall, I just put a whole new sound system in there. It's phenomenal what that sounds like now. And so they're back booking bands again. And so, we've got, and the Music Hall, shout out to those guys. They've done an incredible job of bringing in, a slew of bands, and East Side's George,
Oh, yeah.
bringing in tons of acts still. And
Yeah.
there's lots of good venues in town. So London's been fortunate. We're fortunate to have places that.
Well, George took off after Norma Jeans went down for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, he had the ball in his court when that happened for sure.
Yeah, and I would argue. I mean, there's a couple places I can think of, small ones, in the core. But other than that, I think George is kind of all
That's
in
the only rock club.
It's all,
really.
on his own.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right now.
There's nothing else really when you
No.
think about it. There's smaller like I heard Alumni Hall.
Mm-hmm.
That's that. I don't know if there's anybody going in there, but Centennial Hall.
No.
Centennial Hall. Wasn't the Orchestra London there?
Yeah, it was for a
right?
period.
It was there,
Yeah.
and I heard that they soundproofed it better in there, and they got a better PA in there.
Yep.
You heard that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So-
I put the PA in, and it's
yeah. I haven't been in there since.
and it's
that.
great. The new PA and the new lighting rig is great. And
But I've heard people tell me that,
great.
but it sounds really good in there now. It's unbelievable because I can remember that place sounding horrible.
And it was a massive challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because especially, when we would go in there, the ceiling in Centennial Hall, it couldn't really hold a lot of weight. So we couldn't really hang our PA. Our PA's a line array.
Oh, right.
We couldn't hang it. So we had to
Right.
ground stack it. And that creates other challenges because, a pile of the people are in the balcony.
Yeah, yeah,
So how does that work, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
speakers are below the balcony.
yeah.
So there was all kinds of challenges back in the day, but now we're using the brackets that were engineered off the wall to hang the older PA. That PA's come down. We put the new PA up, and yeah, it's great, and it's great for a lot of things. They do a lot of different stuff in there, not just rock acts, but actually Mariana's Trench was in there last night, and packed house, and that's incredible for those guys because. That venue had lost a lot of that to the Music Hall because they didn't have a PA and because of these things, right? So, and that goes back to your point, right, about how bands used to carry their PA,
Right.
but now they don't.
Right.
So now the venue's got to step up and put the PA in,
That.
right?
Right.
And they did. And now look, miraculously, it's, now everybody's, this is
Yeah, I
great.
used to remember horror stories from your dad about renting PAs and and the band would take the PA out. And he'd have to go and get it, and they're going out west or something like that, and he'd have to send somebody out west to pick up the truck and stuff like that. Yeah, oh my
Crazy,
God,
man.
it was crazy shit back then.
Oh yeah, that was. He's told me a little bit about those days, but I think some of that he tries to block out because it was a wild
It was
time.
horrendous what he used to go through, man.
Yeah, man.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, the stress. I mean, I think I have stress, but I mean, the stress he must have had back then
Yeah.
must have been wild. But yeah, it's interesting. So I know this is kind of a broad sort of question, but I thought to ask this, and feel free to answer it in any way you like. How important is live music in life in general?
To me,
To you and just in general?
live music.
Yeah.
I listen to live music every day. like whether it's on YouTube or whether I go out to a concert. Yes, music is important to me, and learning is important to me too, and being able to do something different. Like within the last 2-3 years, I taught myself how to play slide guitar. So I'm playing a little slide now. And I go on YouTube and I can play along with songs and learn from different people. That's really important to me. I love that. I love it. It's just something that you can teach an old dog new tricks. I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The last sort of area I want to talk about is ticketing. What do you think about all these crazy sort of ticket prices?
Oh, no, that should be outlawed. A ticket should be a certain price and not beyond that price. Even if you scalp that ticket, I don't think that ticket should be the same price. That should be outlawed. And I don't know how the hell they can police that, but it's bullshit is what it is. Like the whole Taylor Swift thing, I mean, that's a prime example there. Like thousands and thousands of dollars to see Taylor Swift, that's crazy.
In some cases, tens of thousands of dollars,
yes.
right?
Yeah, but it's crazy.
It's crazy, yeah.
Yeah. No,
Yeah, the ticketing thing is interesting, and I mean,
but it's the same with hockey too. It's the same. Sports is the same way. You get tickets to see a game, and it's a game that you want to see, and it's sold out. You'll pay more for the ticket.
And I think that's what they're doing, right? I think they're pushing to see how, because there's a tipping point, I suppose, right? Like where all of a sudden, okay, well, people aren't buying, so we got to lower the price. But I think that's part of the game is that they're pushing to see how much can we get for these tickets.
Yeah.
But it's like, here's my thing about that.
But they never did that in the old days, though. Like scalping wasn't a thing in the old days. It might have been to a certain extent. I can remember my wife. She went to see 2 Beatles shows, and she paid, I think, $5-6 for the tickets.
Wow.
And that puts it in perspective, right?
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
I mean, that's crazy. I went and saw Frank Zappa, and I paid $7 to go see Frank Zappa.
Wow.
And it's gone through the. I mean, it's like anything. It's like there are people that'll pay through the nose because they got the money to do it.
I think that artists, because their content's online, they've become accessible for free through the online thing. And then the challenge now is that everybody's like, okay, well, one of the only revenue streams is gigs.
Right.
And everybody jumps on that. Everybody who's involved in the artist, that's attached to the artist, jumps on that. The promoter included, but everybody. And so it's interesting. I think that, because they give away so much for free, now everybody's like, well, we got to make it on the show. So now these tickets, but there becomes a point. Here's my pet peeve about it. There becomes a point where the real hardcore fans that maybe can't afford those tickets,
well, that's the thing, right?
Don't get to see those bands,
right? And it's not fair to that. Why should somebody with money, be able to go see a show when somebody is a true fan? A lot of the people with money, maybe they're not true fans. Maybe they get it just for the sake of going to the show. Oh, I went to see so and so.
That's right.
Because they can afford to do it.
Or they're a fan, but they're not a hardcore.
No,
fan.
not a hardcore. No, in the old days, you'd line up for tickets, and that's what it was. You'd sleep on the street to see the Beatles for 3 nights. That's the way it was. But you did it.
And case in point, there's people that would happily do that.
Yeah.
But can't afford it.
Yeah.
They just straight up can't afford it.
Right.
Because the ticket price is just straight up too high.
Yeah.
Now, I get where some of that comes from. The cost of touring has gone up. The cost of fuel is high. The cost of renting a bus is high. The cost of hiring production out has gotten more expensive because the production equipment has gotten more expensive.
Yeah.
Like I talked about that console we got for 3 Days Grace. I mean, the price of a house.
Yeah.
The whole PA used to be the price of that. Everything used to be the price of a house.
Yeah.
So yes, I understand that incrementally, yes, the cost of lots of parts of it have gone up, but so have the venue sizes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I
mean, so there's there has to be a balance. I remember.
But
when,
how can they police that though? I mean, technology that
The
won't allow you to do it.
I think the bands at some point, you know, I mean, you mentioned Taylor. She's, from what I understand, she's somewhat self-produced. I think that if you get to a point where you're blessed enough and you're successful enough to be self-produced, I think you need to check yourself in the mirror. Mm-hmm. I think you need to be your own regulation. I think you need to look at it and go, hey, are my true fans able to afford to come see me play?
Right.
And because if you're self-produced, you can do that. And I think that there is something to be said about that, right? Yeah. About really, you know, you don't necessarily, you know, you look at the Rolling Stones, the U2s, like some of these bands that have been around for countless decades. You don't remain in the game. Like, it's one thing to be relevant and have, you know, big hits that are timeless and all that, but, you know, these are bands that are still playing.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said about that. And it's like they've created a fan base, young and old, that continue to go and support them. Yeah. I think that there becomes a tipping point here where if you don't check yourself and you don't realize that, okay, maybe we're being a bit greedy here, you become inaccessible to a certain group of your most hardcore fans.
Right.
And I think that the people who are self-promoting should be the first ones to put their hand up and go, yeah, maybe we should do this a little differently. And one of the first bands that, going back, that even before the ticket prices got real crazy, one of the bands that sort of did that was U2. I've been to every show that they've done basically except Pop Mart, or since Pop Mart. And there was a period there where they went really crazy and went and, you know, they were doing the Rogers Center and it was sold out multiple nights, whatever. And then they did another tour after that. I can't think of the tour, How to Dismantle Atomic Bomb, I think it was. And they went back to arenas. And their theory behind that, and this sort of speaks to part of what I'm saying, their theory behind that was that we want to become more accessible so they did more nights, mm-hmm. slightly smaller venue, but more nights, and the ticket price was very reasonable.
Right.
And the venue was smaller, so you were closer, right? And they took all of that into consideration when they did it. Yeah. And I think that was smart at the time.
Yeah, I think a lot of bands are doing that now too. There are a lot of bands that they love to play smaller venues, you know?
Yeah.
You know, nobody wants to play an arena like like it's just too much. You can't relate to people that are up in the nosebleed section, you know? You can't really relate to those.
You can't even see them.
Yeah. That's right. I mean, yeah. No, I think that.
Yeah.
But that's a tough one, though. It's a tough one because when you got people who are willing to pay anything, you know.
Yeah. Well, it kind of maybe goes back to what you were saying about, you know, rent a hall and you know, put on some shows again. You know, get back to the old school.
Yeah.
Start, you know, kind of like starting over, but I mean, you know, we're at a point where it's done this, you know, and maybe
there's no way to go. You hit the ceiling.
Yeah.
You know, you pretty well hit the ceiling.
And there'll be some acts like Taylor that continue to try to maintain that. I get that. But I don't think it's sustainable forever.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we're seeing that. We're seeing that bands cancel parts of their tours and stuff because they can't sell enough tickets for the size of venues that they're in.
That's true, yeah.
So we're in an interesting time. But I think your son's on it. I think we need to educate the next generation, and that's why you know, I'm doing this. So, but anyways, I appreciate you coming on, man, because this is all part of it. Part of getting it out there.
Yeah, I had a good time. This was good.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man, for coming on.
Cheers,
everybody. Ryan here from Music City Live. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you on the next episode, everybody. Take care. Thank you for watching Music City Live. If you liked this episode, like the video. And for more clips and episodes, subscribe to the channel. Feel free to join the conversation by commenting below and visit us at musiccityliveshow.com.